As the economy crashes, America piles on debt. Is this a looming disaster? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode has been sponsored by MOVA Globes. All across the world, governments have put their countries under lockdown. People are unemployed. Small businesses are closed forever. Here in the U.S., after more than half a year of partial lockdowns, the economy is getting back on its feet. But is it a V-shaped recovery or a K-shaped recovery? Or an artist formerly known as Prince-shaped recovery? But the price of that recovery is that the U.S. government has had to spend an enormous amount of money that it doesn't have. People are worried that it could cause bigger problems. Matt Gnaizda has more.
Thanks, Chris. The U.S. government has spent trillions of dollars to fix the economy that it broke with months of coronavirus lockdowns. They've spent money to bail out Wall Street. And they've spent money to bail out Main Street. Kind of unevenly, but that's a rabbit hole I already went down in this episode. Anyway, since March this year, the U.S. government has racked up more than $3.5 trillion in new public debt. Some people have called this debt a looming disaster. In total, the national public debt is now $21 trillion. That's crazy. And we all know that when you have a debt, you have to pay it back eventually. But it's hard to even imagine $21 trillion in debt, which is why you haven't imagined it. Good thing, too, because the people who are spending that money are counting on you not imagining it. They also don't want you to think about who's actually buying the debt. See, normally the majority of institutions that buy U.S. debt are American investors, followed by foreign investors. But in 2020, the one buying almost all the new debt is the Federal Reserve, although they're buying it indirectly. And they're buying this debt with money that they create out of thin air just for this purpose. And I know what you're going to type in the comments below, so just say it with me. Money printer go brr. It's more complicated than that, but that's a rabbit hole I went down in this episode. Anyway, there's an unimaginable amount of U.S. public debt. $21 trillion. The best way to understand that number is to compare it to the size of the U.S. economy, or GDP. That's because economic activity is what ultimately pays off that debt. By early next year, U.S. public debt will exceed the size of the GDP for the first time since World War II. So, does that mean America will collapse or possibly explode? Hopefully neither. But it does put us in league with only a small handful of other countries that currently have more debt than GDP, like Greece, where the citizens refuse to pay taxes, and Venezuela, where no one has food to eat, and Japan, where they have taxes and food, but the economy has been stagnant since the mid-90s, and they're constantly being attacked by giant squid. The main short-term problem with having too much debt is that you have to pay off all of the debt that comes due each year. Think of it like interest payments on a mortgage. The U.S. spends in the neighborhood of $400 billion a year just to pay off the current debt. The Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates extremely low right now, so issuing new debt is cheap. Low interest rates do cause other types of problems, but that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down in this episode. The long-term problem with having too much debt is that eventually you have to pay all of it off. Not just the debt that comes due this year, but the total $21 trillion. And in the medium term, economists believe that an unprecedented and growing debt greatly increases the odds of a fiscal crisis. Policymakers are then faced with an awful trade-off of sudden and severe spending cuts and/or crushing tax increases, both of which run the risk of further damaging the economy. Will there be a fiscal crisis? I'll get to that after this short break. Welcome back. As the U.S. issues more and more debt to pay for the coronavirus relief, will there be a fiscal crisis? That is roughly what happened in Greece. For the US, having a big national debt isn't new. In fact, from the very beginning in 1790, the US intentionally created a national debt by offering to buy individual states' debts. For that idea, we can thank Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. You know, the guy from the musical. And the national debt has just grown bigger and bigger each year, except for that time in 1835 that President Andrew Jackson paid it all off to free the US from the control of central bankers. But that's like several rabbit holes I'm not going to go down. The next president created a national debt again, and we've had a bigger and bigger one ever since. The debt payments each year are getting expensive, and the government has to pay them, unlike those dumb things the government doesn't really have to pay for, like education. So debt payments cut into other government spending. Wait, unless you just borrow more money to pay off your existing debt, which is exactly what the US government does. I get it. You can just keep borrowing more money as long as you make your payments on time and everyone believes you're going to pay back all the debt at some point. And in America, most everyone believes it. So at what point will the US government accumulate so much debt that people stop believing it will be paid off? It's unclear. Under President Obama, the national public debt more than doubled, ending at around $14 trillion. At the time, he was criticized for being the most fiscally irresponsible president in history. And in 2016, we were told that a fiscal crisis could happen soon. But it has not happened yet, and it doesn't look like it'll happen soon either. Not that we ever see it coming. Serious debt crises have happened before with other countries, though, when they refuse or aren't able to pay off debt. This is called sovereign default. One consequence is that bondholders may take action. In 1902, Venezuela refused to pay some of its sovereign debt to Europe, so European countries imposed a naval blockade to force Venezuela to pay it back. No developed country has defaulted on its debt in more than a century. Instead, when a country is getting close to default, they just renegotiate. Like how in 2015, Greece was unable to repay its 1.5 trillion euro loan to the IMF. No, the boring IMF. Yeah. But instead of defaulting, Greece renegotiated its debt. And by renegotiated, I mean they got the IMF to agree to call it a delay instead of a default. But everyone knew what was going on, and no one wants to invest in Greece anymore. Well, except for China, and that's a rabbit hole we went down in an episode of China Uncensored a few years ago. So we in the US do not want to become like Greece. Once a country stops paying back loans, or looks like it might, then investors back off, then the economy takes a hit, then investors back off even more, and you know where that ends up. In ruins. In 2020, the US national debt is bigger than it's ever been because of coronavirus spending. And at some point, we're going to have to pay it back. But is it a looming disaster? Well, that's the thing. It's unclear. The recent US debt was issued to deal with a short-term crisis. It's like drinking 5 cups of coffee because you need to stay up all night to finish a term paper. It gets the job done. But if you drink 5 cups of coffee and stay up every night for a week, you'll end up thinking you've turned into a bumblebee, and if you can't find a field of dandelions, the entire hive is gonna die. I had a stressful time in college. Anyway, the reason the US government could issue $3.5 trillion in debt in just the past few months, and no one really worries about it, is that we've all got more immediate problems on our mind, like not dying from the coronavirus, and staying employed, and bringing nectar back to the hive. And that's actually the trick. See, as long as no one worries about the national debt, it's not a problem. Because as long as investors keep getting paid back now and believe they'll be paid back in the future, they'll keep buying more debt. I know that sounds kind of hand-wavy, but that's because sometimes economics is less about science and more about psychology. Like how the stock market goes up when people believe it's going to go up. Or how people say they love a movie just because everyone else says it's good, even though the plot is absurd. And for goodness sake, Bella, he's 107 years old. You're 17. What are you thinking? At any rate, the US is racking up more and more debt during the coronavirus bailout. But as long as people don't worry about it, it's not a looming disaster. In a Pew Research Center survey this summer, 47% of U.S. adults call the deficit a very big problem in the country today, which may sound like a lot, but that's down from 55% in the fall of 2018, which is to say, as the debt gets bigger, people get stupider. Of course, eventually, someone's going to have to pay this money back. Fortunately, it's not going to be you. And by the time your stupid great-great-grandchildren are saddled with $43 quadrillion in debt, only 8% of them will say it's a very big problem. The rest of them will be too busy slaving away in the space mines to pay back the debt. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. And this episode has been sponsored by MOVA Globes. You've seen a MOVA globe on my desk before. The technology is really awesome. When you pick it up, it keeps spinning. And when you put it back on its base, it corrects its motion and starts rotating again. It doesn't require any cords or batteries. It just works. It's powered by ambient light. MOVA also has dozens of other cool designs too. MOVA Globes makes a great gift for your friends, your family, or, let's be honest, for yourself. Because we all need a little extra something in 2020. Click the link in the description below and pick your favorite version. And when you buy a MOVA Globe, you'll also be supporting your favorite show about America. So click below to check it out now. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.